This week we're going to look at break-even, operational leverage, and financial leverage. When a company talks about a break-even point, they're talking about the number of units produced and the cost of those units and the amount of revenue from the units being exactly equal. We don't want to operate at the break-even point, but we want to operate above the break-even point. When we look at operational leverage, we're talking about using fixed assets to increase our profits by having a machine that can generate product at a lower rate. Operational leverage occurs when we have fixed assets being used in the production of our products. Financial leverage occurs when we have use of bank loans, and we combine the two of these together to come up with combined leverage. So that's really the topics of this week. When looking at break even, we think in terms of our revenue and the number of units being produced. And what we find is that if we were to look strictly at the operation, that we're going to have some costs that we would consider to be fixed costs. Those fixed costs would remain the same no matter what. So down here we would have our fixed costs. This could be the cost of a lease. This could be the cost of payroll for senior folks, but it's not tied to the cost of the production of the particular units. The variable costs need to be added to these fixed costs to come up with a total cost of our product. In terms of revenue, when we sell units, we start at zero, and for each unit we sell, we get a certain additional amount of revenue at a higher rate than our costs. This would be the revenue. At a certain point, we find the two lines cross, and that's the point that we call the break-even. So our break-even point is a point where the costs exactly equal the revenue. Our break-even then is the cost divided by our selling price minus our variable costs. And both the selling price and the variable costs are for each unit. For example, if we took a TV that we could sell at a price of $400 and we looked at our fixed costs, we might find that we have building rent for $300,000 a year, equipment leases, and we might consider the manager's salary, who, no matter how many units we produce, is going to essentially earn the same amount. If I looked at all those fixed costs would equal the sum of these three, or $500,000 in fixed costs. Similarly, if we were to take and look at variable costs, I'm going to find things like material, labor, machine costs, and utilities. All these total together to make up our variable cost. And we can total those things up, and we see that we have a variable cost of $233.33 each. The break even then is going to equal my fixed cost divided by my selling price minus how much each unit cost me to produce. It's going to come up with 2,994 units, 999 units, 94 cents. The reality is you can't make a partial unit, so that's really going to round off to 3,000 for us. And this is units, not dollars. And that's how you do the calculation. We've determined the break-even point. Let's go back up to our chart here at the top and look at this a minute. Above this break-even point of 3,000, we make profits. And the higher we go above the 3,000, the greater the profit we make. All this area out in here is the area of profit. Similarly, if I don't reach the break-even point, I lose money. The break-even point indicates to us that we have leverage because we have some fixed costs which do not change with the volume that we produce. And of course, the opposite is true. We lose money pretty quickly if we are not at the break-even point. This leads to the discussion of leverage. We measure a company's leverage in terms of how much financial leverage they have and how much operational leverage they have. We would want to compare companies and analyze our own company in terms of degree of leverage over time. Operational leverage is earnings before interest and taxes divided by earnings before interest and taxes less the fixed costs. If fixed cost was 0, then earnings before interest and taxes divided by earnings before interest and taxes would equal 1. If I have no financial leverage, I would be at 1. So for example, if we were to take 5,000 units, it's $400 each. This gives us a revenue of $2 million and costs of $101,666,667, earnings before interest and taxes of $833.33. Degree of operational leverage, then it's going to be equal to our earnings before interest and taxes divided by earnings before interest and taxes minus my fixed cost. Remember, our fixed cost up there were in this case, the degree of financial leverage is equal to earnings before interest and taxes divided by the earnings before interest and taxes less interest. If we had no interest, we would have a leverage of 1. Let's assume an interest of $100,000, so the calculation degree of financial leverage would be equal to my earnings before interest and taxes divided by my earnings before interest and taxes minus the $100,000 for a degree of financial leverage of 1.1. Finally, we want to talk about combined leverage. Our combined leverage is calculated by taking the earnings before interest and taxes and dividing by the earnings before interest and taxes, and we subtract off the fixed cost and the interest. The more leverage you have, the higher your risk. In this particular case, let's do the calculation. The combined leverage is equal to my earnings before interest and taxes divided by the earnings before interest and taxes minus my $100,000 in interest minus the $500,000 in fixed costs, and this gives us a combined leverage of 3.6. And again, these are numbers that are used in comparison. So over time, we watch how much operational leverage we have. That's use of fixed assets to generate higher profits, and how much financial leverage we have. That's use of borrowing or liabilities to generate profits for the company, and the use of them in combination with each other. The higher the risk, the greater the reward, and the higher the risk, the greater the opportunity for a problem if you have a recession. The challenge is to become a company that operates at some degree of leverage, but not such a high leverage that it risks the future of the company.